Into the Valley, take 7, 3.
Welcome, everybody, into the Valley. I am Ethan Shutt, joined by Philip Russell and my brother Ryan. Gentlemen, how are we feeling on this lovely Monday afternoon?
Have I had a great day? Absolutely. Did the Suns have a great week?
Can we immediate pause? The fact that they go 3-1 and we're like, did they have a good week? They only lost one game by 1 point, maybe. No, 11. Sorry, they lost.
That's 2 once, so you were
right?
close.
Yes, Philip.
My house is empty, so I'm a little sad because I'm moving, but I still got my homie little basketball man over here, and I'm looking at my homie little basketball man on
Yes,
Ryan's
sir.
hoodie.
He's
so
everywhere.
You know what? All things considered, I'm doing all right.
Now, to the folks listening on the audio podcast, you don't get the benefit of seeing Philip's really depressing looking room he's sitting in. Next week, if not the week after, you're probably going to be in the new place, hopefully kind of set up. Those that are watching on YouTube get the added benefit of seeing my beautiful office, Philip's sad, naked office, and Ryan's ever-changing Zoom background, which we always appreciate. And whether you are listening on audio or watching with us on YouTube, we do want to say, number one, thank you. And number two, if you have a second, feel free to click that like button on the YouTube video. If you're listening on audio, give us a review. Those are cool. We like hearing what you're thinking about it. And on YouTube, again, feel free, whether that's audio or video, hit the subscribe button so you know when our material's coming out. You get notified. We do our best to make it easy for you. Every Tuesday, right around lunchtime, we have a new episode coming out, and we're trying to stick to that. But Ryan already kind of alluded, we have this week in the rear view. We always start by recapping what's gone on since our last episode. And since our last episode, for those listening that don't remember, we played the Miami Heat, we being the Suns, of course, because I am one entity with the organization, played the Heat on Tuesday night, winning 110-100. The one loss coming to the Magic, 122-111, which I do think we can chalk up to just everyone on their team wanting to put on a good showing before the trade deadline, since they were all like, hey guys, one last time to play together. Let's have some fun before we all go our separate ways.
I'm sure that's what it was. It was the team rallying cry.
You don't think
of all
so?
These best buds.
I bet.
No, I think we came out flat and just got stomped.
Hey, different strokes, man. Friday night, we had the Raptors 104-100 win, and then goodness, yesterday at noon Central tip-off, because that's normal.
Taking it back to the early 2000s.
We have an overtime win, 101-97 against the hideous Buzz City courted Hornets. It was just an atrocious game. It was ugly to look at. It was ugly to every little part of it was hideous. But that is our week in review. Gentlemen, we now are getting to the point where it's a week when you go 3-1, which is great. I love that. I love the not settling. We were a fan base of consolation prizes and good efforts for a very long time. I think we as a collective are moving past that, but still got to be honest and critical when a bad performance happens. Or a good one, trying to make sure you don't go too high, go too low. But the Suns are number 2 in the West still going into this episode. Anything jump out after this weird away road trip against all the teams out east?
DeAndre Ayton had a really good week, and I was very impressed. We say it a lot. The guy gets nitpicked. He should get nitpicked. He's on the team that's second in the West right now. He was great. I loved his defense. His defense made me very happy, and I was very impressed. I'm rooting for a young guy to do well, to find his place in a league. He's more of a traditional 5 coming into the league in a time when more traditional 5s are not necessarily in vogue. But seeing him playing help side defense, if you're a basketball nerd, seeing his drop defense on pick and roll, especially against the Heat, it was great. He did a really good job, and that's exactly what the Suns are needing from him moving forward.
And just for clarification, I don't think anybody, just for folks listening who don't know the three of us personally, I don't think any of us are rooting for his failure. In fact, we want to see him succeed. That being said, if you are invested into Suns Twitter with any sort of depth, there does seem to be at least some division of the Suns camp that has it out for Ayton's failure and wants to see it implode. Whether that's spite because of the miss on Luka or other things. I just want to make sure our listeners know that the three of us are very much in the camp of we want the DeAndre Ayton. We see his potential and want to see what he becomes. We're also just realists about the ebbs and flows of his game and just want to see him kind of weed out some of those misses that he has in his game and hopefully put together, a good career for himself. But
well, hey, it's all about that second contract. So I think he's on his way there. But yeah, this past week, I think one of the stats that, because I pulled it up as prep of one of the things that stood out to me. Got to the free throw line decently, nothing great, but didn't miss any. I like that. Defensively, though, was what jumped off the screen to me in all four of those games. Just seemed dialed in defensively. It wasn't always blocks. It was a lot of times cutting off a good rotation, hedging up on a pick, and actually knowing when to drop back, how to do that properly. It was just, he looked in. He didn't look lost. And I think the stat that actually stands out to most when you realize he's having a good week are his minutes. And that might seem like a silly thing to bring up for your number one overall starting center type guy. But leading up to the Lakers game where it looked like he kind of turned the corner, he didn't play more than 30 minutes for the last 10 games. Starting on March 3rd, we have 25 minutes, 22 minutes, 23 minutes, 29, 28, 26, 18 against the Timberwolves. And then the Lakers game, he kind of got it figured out, played great. Again, big mismatch, did have the advantage there, but 32 minutes. And then this week, 34, 34, 29, 34. And that stands out in two ways. One, that Monty didn't think he was a detriment on the court, which has really plagued him, whether that's his perimeter defense against guards. He did get abused at times against Charlotte, but he was able to stay on the court, which is huge. You need him out there. And then also the second part of why his minutes gone down, he'd been getting into foul trouble, which was not something that I would say was a staple of Ayton as a whole. That wasn't something I was accustomed to seeing, So it was good for him to make himself an option. And this week he was able to do that. And that was good. I mean, we talked last week, this stretch of games this past week and this week are really your last little bit of tune-up before things get awful. This upcoming schedule between today and when we record next week, we have the Hawks, who have kind of been figuring it out, which concerns me. The Bulls, which hopefully Ayton can get some revenge on Vucevic, because that was, I mean, he took care of business last time. Seeing how he is in Chicago, which again, Chicago, another young team figuring it out. I think Philip, as the guy who watches every Bulls game, could probably go way more in depth with that. And then the Thunder, who, goodness gracious, Al Horford out for the year because he wants to be, because the team wants him to be. That's a crazy story from this week. And then the Rockets, the 20-game losing streak Rockets. So this is the time to get those wins before you're hit with what is it, like Clippers, Lakers, Clippers, Sixers, Celtics, Bucks, and then like you do that again. So anything, I guess, that we look back at this week, you at least have the optimistic view of at least you went 3-1. Things are still clicking. I don't remember, if you remember, like on ESPN stats, there's always like the last 10 games. I don't remember the last time it wasn't 7-3 or better. Like it's always 7-3, 8-2, 9-1. Like you're getting these good chunk wins with the occasional kind of dud loss. But something that stood out, and both of you guys texted me about it as it was happening, was these wins are, I'm not going to say starting to, but we're getting some real ugly wins where it's, you have a lead that you shouldn't have lost. You're playing a team that you should be able to close out. And you can chalk that up to a million things, but overall, we've kind of just seen that this is not a very clutch team. And I know there are other podcasts out there. I believe the Timeline had one come out today that went really, really in depth. I'd encourage you to listen to that. Mike and Sam are wonderful and will do a fantastic job continually with their great content, but don't want to go super duper in depth. It's been done. But what kind of jumps out to you when you see these fourth quarter collapses, these incoherent offenses being run towards the end of the game? Is there one thing that stands out to you as maybe like the big concern, or is it more of a group effort? And Philip, I'll let you start with this one.
Yeah. So getting to that point, the big concern right now is the bench. The bench has been struggling a little bit, especially last 5 games. Dario is -8, basically, net rating. Dooley has been rough. Recently, campaigns in the negative. Not a lot of bench guys are actually in the positive right now with net rating, which we all know what Dario was like during the middle stretch of the season. He was just otherworldly with this net rating.
That 6th man of the year. I hope no one finds those old episodes where we were vouching for that one, because I don't think that's happening
maybe Torrey
anymore.
Craig.
I think it was the guys on Locked In Suns podcast. They were doing the they do this like Dario 6-man update, and a couple of games ago they were just like, the only update we have is just like insert sad trombone here. Like it's not happening. He's falling off a cliff. Shooting was rough this week from the bench. So if the bench figures it out, then the Suns play from ahead, which is where this team needs to be. Because when it comes to clutch minutes, there's a really difficult question to ask. And again, Sam and Mike do just an outstanding job on this in their podcast. I'm going to double what Ethan said, say, please listen to that, especially if you're big into the X's and O's of basketball strategy.
So good. So good.
Yeah. Yeah. Check
out their YouTube channel as well, because they do some really good video updates, either on player profiles or just highlights. But yeah, all the love to those guys. I'll shut up now.
Yeah, you're good. The biggest question for the Suns is who's the primary playmaker in a clutch situation? And it's a hard question to answer. And obviously, it's one of 2 guys. It's Booker or CP3. And there are real pros and cons to each of them. Just as an example, Booker, a lot of times, can have mismatches in the post if he's coming off of some action. But if you start with him, we know what he can do, and he gets ahead of steam if you get him in a pick and roll, or if you get him in an isolation. But if he's the one initiating the offense, CP3 isn't great off ball. So that's a really difficult decision for Monty to make. Do you take the ball out of your young all-stars hands and give it to the savvy veteran, or keep it in Booker's hands, where you might be taking away some of Chris Paul's strong suit in that primary playmaking role? And it is not an answered question. It's a question that will hopefully be answered by the time the playoffs come. But to put an even finer point on it, the big thing that the Suns are missing right now is a superstar. And we've talked about this on the podcast before. You don't have a LeBron, you don't have a Dame, you don't have a Steph Curry, who is unquestionably getting the ball in that moment and who you're going to trust, not necessarily just to make the shot, but to make the right play. It's just a reality of the season. They don't have a player at that echelon.
Yeah, and I think you might have mentioned on an early episode, or it might have been a text, as the year kind of started, when it was kind of off to a rough stretch. And I think someone actually tweeted out near identical sentiments this week, which is, how many times do we have to watch Booker and Paul take turns running ISO when the game is on the line? And that is, unfortunately, it's because neither one of them have emerged as the one to go to. And it doesn't seem like, for whatever reason, they're able to run an effective offense in terms of some sort of motion, even to the simplest form, to make something happen.
And I think if you're looking for a specific example of that, watch the late fourth quarter and overtime of this week's Hornets game. There were several instances where Devin Booker would get double teamed and would just panic pass. There was one play in particular in overtime where the last known spot he thought Mikal was, he just threw it there, and Mikal was nowhere near there. And there could have been some miscommunication there, but Ethan jokingly texted me, I guess that's why Devin Booker doesn't like getting double teamed in the offseason.
was funny. I feel bad, but yeah, I think that one was a miscommunication. But yeah, it was one of those
But it
things.
was worrisome to look and say, if Devin Booker can't make plays here against the Hornets, what does this mean for 4 out of 7 games in the playoffs? You know what I mean? I don't know. It's just there's still quite a few question marks that are of concern.
Yeah, and one of the biggest ones for me right now is just the way the roster is being utilized, not as much how it's built. Like, I love the way the team is built. But the big question for me, number one, like you said, Philip, you don't have the superstar. Okay, then what are you going to do about it? And we look at the playoffs of previous years. You see teams that do great. Typically, they do have their superstar. But even seeing, okay, well, how do you manage when that's not happening? And I think come playoff time, there will be very few times, if any, where Paul or Booker aren't on. I would be stunned if we don't see a Devin Booker in the playoffs that is just on one. And people can troll me on Twitter about Chris Paul's playoff record. I don't care. I've seen the guy play the Thunder's Rocket series that everyone seems to forget from last year. Paul can still figure it out. But after those two guys, you have almost an entire roster of guys that have never played in the playoffs, if you're looking at a lot of the young talent. And so then we see about how everything is moved around the last week. Trade deadline happened from last recording to this recording. I think Woj said it was the most trades ever that he's reported in any trade deadline, and the Suns didn't do anything. They got Torrey Craig a couple days before for cash, which incredibly impressive. And when you're looking at a player who does have valuable playoff minutes under his belt, he's a superb one. And he just fits the whole mold of the team, which I love. But teams around the Suns got better. And that makes me then even that much more concerned as I look late. Goodness, who are we talking about earlier out in the West? Obviously, I would say the biggest one would be the Nuggets. They had the biggest splash in terms of acquiring Aaron Gordon. Honestly, I think the Suns got pretty lucky that so much movement happened out east. There were a lot of talented players who were being shopped around that I'm thrilled ended up on the Celtics or Bulls or insert whoever. But you see the Nuggets getting better. In my opinion, you see the Trailblazers getting a really, really good piece in their deal with the Raptors, which is kind of crazy. I don't think anyone expected the big Raptors trade to not include Kyle Lowry, but you're seeing them get better. The Lakers just signed Andre Drummond, which to me, I think is really interesting when you start looking at the matchups against the Suns. And part of that goes back to where I think is a blaring hole in our roster setup, which is another big, right? We've joked that Ayton can eat against the Lakers when Anthony Davis isn't there because you're going against Harrell and the ghost of Marc Gasol. No offense, Mark. But it seems like other teams in the West got better. How do you guys feel about our standing in the West right now moving forward?
I don't know how to feel, to be honest, because I think even on the pod we talked about, we didn't see the Suns making a move. Nothing really of the players available. There wasn't a lot that we were like, this is a trade that we think will happen. But you watch everybody else make trades. I just feel like something could have been done. Even in the buyout market, nothing's quite happened yet. And you see where some players wound up that was unexpected. LaMarcus Aldridge to Brooklyn, JJ Redick even to Dallas on a trade. Everybody thought he'd be bought out. There just seems like we could have done something based on the way some things shook out, that it feels like we really didn't swing. I was going to say swung and missed, but it looks like we just kind of took a walk. And I don't know. I still feel like we're probably a top 4 team in the West. I'm not feeling as confident as 2 being plausible with the way Denver's now built. But I still think we'll be a top 4 team. I just think it makes maybe some of the 6, 7, 8 teams a little bit scarier than maybe they would have been.
Yeah, and I think you have to distinguish the power rankings if you're doing them in your head between regular season power rankings and playoff power rankings. I think those are very different right now with the way the Suns roster is constructed. I think regular season power rankings, Suns are still first or second. And in the West because they're still a fairly deep team. They're not particularly deep at the 4 and 5, which is okay. They can run out guards who can score, guards who can defend, wings who can guard, wings who can defend, especially now with Torrey Craig. Torrey Craig's sidebar, he's bigger than I realized he was.
Dude,
that dude
I
is
thought the
stout,
same
6'7",
thing.
225. That dude across his chest, he's barrel chested. He's a real deal. But the big, go ahead.
No, I'm gonna say I thought the same thing when he first rolled out for his first minutes with the Suns. I was like, oh, he thick. Like it's like a McHale that's juiced a little bit. You know what I mean? Like he's got the long arms. He plays that same just lanky, but man, he can hang
big brother.
Well, he can hang down low significantly better than I remembered. And that is where we can talk later about potential playoff rosters or rotations. It's opened a lot in my mind having that one piece. So I will say that it is a great signing.
But the point that I was going to make, when it comes to play power rankings, I think realistically the Suns have to fall around 4, 3, 4, maybe even 5. Lakers, so I did this when fully healthy. The Lakers are a problem for everybody when they're fully healthy because they just got bigger and they're already a very big, good team. Clippers, they just have, I know what happened last year. They have a bunch of talent in the right places that I think they still need to be considered. And they're still even playing well right now. The team that I'm not exactly sure what to do with right now is the Nuggets. I think a clicking Nuggets team with the Joker especially, I think that would cause a lot of problems, especially against a team like the Suns in the playoffs. So going into it right now, I would probably put the Suns 4th behind those 3 teams. And if you want to make some sort of argument about the Suns' ability to match up with the Nuggets, maybe. But as far as like the Mavs go, getting JJ Redick, they're going to be a better shooting team. I'm not sure how much else he's going to add. And then the Blazers, they're still not going to be able to guard anybody. So I'm not overly concerned. And the biggest concern with the Blazers is if it's close, Dame is one of the most amazing clutch players we've ever seen.
I still think, though, the problem is at this point, based on the way everything shook out, is everybody's just debating who's going to finish second to Brooklyn at this point, right? Like, I feel like I can't look at any roster in the West pound for pound and say they're a better roster than the Brooklyn Nets at this point. And to me, that's the frustration is, who we even if we by some miracle make a finals run, my projection is maybe a second round exit. I would be perfectly content with that. I think at the end of the day, the West is just playing for second against this Brooklyn team.
I don't want us to get super sidetracked because I feel like that is a conversation that could super sidetrack us. I disagree because LeBron is still in the West, but I do think, again, though, if you are just looking at that, I like for the Suns' chances that a lot of that talent in the either buyout market, trade, whatever, continued to go out east.
To the east.
Because it didn't change things to the point where you're flipping teams' orders significantly. And again, maybe I'm not quite as high on Aaron Gordon as other people. People were talking that Aaron Gordon to the Nuggets should just significantly change the landscape of everything. I don't see that, mainly because they are still a well-constructed team. I don't think it was like they upgraded from an F to a B+ in some area that they magically needed. So I still think where we're at seems right for the regular season. I kind of would say how I view us is the same way I would view the Jazz, in the same way I would view the Nuggets, where you've got a lot of good, talented players. And this is going to, please don't take this the wrong way. I absolutely think Jokic is a quote unquote superstar, but the way the NBA is played now in terms of the crazy high score, I mean, you saw it last year when the Nuggets and Jazz both were able to do what they did. It was between Mitchell and Murray being explosive scorers, taking over a game, right? To DeAndre Ayton's credit, he plays defense incredibly well against Jokic because he actually has the feet to stick with him. I see the Suns, the Nuggets, the Jazz, teams like that going and doing something special if they have a player that is just playing out of their mind right now. I don't know if that's not giving our bench enough credit. I think our bench can beat anyone's bench, which I love because that's huge. I mean, basketball is a game of runs. You've heard that since you were like 4, if you had the type of coach I did. And so you've got to love the feeling that when your starters, better players are coming out, your second unit should either hold you in the game or excel your position. And that's where I think in terms of the playoffs, the Suns are set up really well, is that depth. The concern is, can your top 5 hang or overpower the other top 5s in the West? And that's where things get a little confusing, just because it seems like we don't know who our top 5 are yet. And that's kind of where I want to bring us to our ending discussion, and it's kind of a 2-parter. One, are you concerned about the ever-changing rotations of the current Phoenix Suns? Monty Williams seems to still be figuring stuff out. Maybe that's due to a lack of a real offseason. Maybe that's due to an influx of new players mixed with a lot of people playing well. I guess it's easy to pick your 5 or 6 when you have 4 or 5 guys sucking. He doesn't have that. He has a lot of guys competing for minutes. And then I guess the follow-up to that, if you're not concerned about the roster and the ever-changing rotations, what is your biggest concern moving forward? And Ryan, I'll go to you. With the rotations moving around, I even tweeted, which I am well aware was probably a little hyperbolic of sorts, but that I would love to see the rotation of Paul, Booker, Bridges, Craig, and Crowder at 5 running a lot of minutes in the playoffs, which, sorry, DA, I don't see any of those 5 players getting just absolutely exposed other than maybe a Crowder at 5 going into Jokic or something. But it's gotten me to the point where I'm considering crazy things like that and putting them out there to the internet as reasonable thoughts. So what are your thoughts right now about, I guess, how Monty's handling things?
I trust Monty, and I trust that he knows the guys. To be honest, I like that 5 that you put out there on Twitter. I'll hold some more judgments on Craig just to see if his play can be sustainable in the way that it's been, because as we've seen, even with Dario, who was, being thrown at a 6th man, he's even kind of backed off that a little bit. So I'm going to reserve some judgments on that. But that 5 would be a really great 5. I would have no issues with that. To me, I am more concerned about this team figuring out how to close games regardless of who's on the floor than I am the rotation itself. We need to figure out how to close games and put teams away when you have a 12-point lead with 6 minutes left than I am who's going to be your 5 players on the floor. If we can figure that out, the rest I think will take care of itself. So I'm not getting too caught up in who the preferred 5 is. That said, I still think in a perfect world, instead of Craig, it's Ayton on the floor. We'll see if he can prove himself in the playoffs. But I want to see us use this last month and a little plus to really nail down closing out games.
Philip, what are your thoughts there? Biggest concern or rotation? What are you thinking?
I'm totally with Ryan. As far as starters not mattering as much as closers. Lakers last year starting Dwight, starting JaVale.
Beautiful.
They're not closing games. They're just in there, set some hard screens, rim run, get a couple highlight dunks, that kind of thing. Same thing back in the Warriors dynasty with guys like Kaman, JaVale, even Andrew Bogut early on. They were out there to get some guys loose early on and then have a seat and let the death line up, take them home. I think ideally it's DeAndre, Jay, and then the normal 3, as long as it's not somebody like the Lakers. If it's somebody like the Lakers where they're going to roll out a veritable true 5 alongside Anthony Davis, if that's the case, then that will present a serious problem for the Suns. And that might be something they have to figure out, where if they have to roll out that much size, can an undersized Torrey Craig or undersized Jay Crowder actually play that? Or are we going to have to see some Frank Kaminsky or
Well,
Dario Saric
so
minutes earlier than we want?
That is leading to my biggest concern right now. And I think the closing thing would probably be my 1A in all honesty, but I was trying to think of what else concerns me. And that is what to do at the 5 right now is a big concern for me for a couple of reasons. So looking at the teams out west that we could be playing in the playoffs, right? With the Jazz, with Rudy Gobert, obviously you would want Ayton out there guarding him, but I do think he is not one offensively that can, quote, take over on an undersized guy to the extent that Jokic Davis could. So you could survive those minutes. The Clippers, I mean, I think you'd be fine without having the true 5 out there. I think you'd be okay. Lakers, obviously not. Nuggets, obviously not. Blazers, Spurs, Mavs, and on, you're okay. There's not a true superstar big over there that you're contending with. One of the things that concerns me the most with our current situation at 5, and we've seen it already, is if Ayton gets in foul trouble early, what big do you have that you can put on the floor and trust? And when it comes to the playoffs, the correct answer you're looking for is no one. Like, we don't have anyone. Like, Frank Kaminsky does not need to be playing playoff minutes. Too easy to exploit on both ends of the floor, right? And you can play we go small type thing. That's fine, but that doesn't work against some of the teams out west. So who do you have that can go do the similar role if Ayton's not able to be out there for whatever reason? And that's what concerns me now. And again, I will say this. The only time the Suns' name popped up on trade deadline day was trying to sign Gorgie Jang after his buyout. That's the only time the Suns' name popped up. So I think that would have been his role. The come in, get fouls if you need to, be the big presence down low. But even like as a rim protector, who do you have outside of DeAndre Ayton? Like I get Jalen Smith, right? Is that our best bet? I mean,
if that's where we're resting our caps for the playoffs, we're
concerning.
in a world of hurt.
I mean, that's concerning to me. So that scares me. And then again, the one thing that you like about having Ayton on the court, in my mind, is the defense against these big guys. The only area where you love to have him on the floor against the smaller lineups offensively is, can we feed him the ball and let him exploit a mismatch? And that Lakers game is legitimately one of the first times I've seen him do that with consistency. So if that continues, he will continue to earn himself playoff minutes because Jokic, AD, whoever can't stay on the floor all game. If he offensively can become an unfair weapon for you, then it's a no-brainer to have him out there because defensively he's holding his own. He's not going to get abused. He can then do something on the other end. The problem is if he can't, it gets iffy. So again, to take a mile-high view, whatever you want to call it, bird's eye view, it's nice to at least be having discussions that involve the Suns in the playoffs. This is lovely. And the fact that we're nitpicking about a team that, again, doesn't do worse than going well over 500 in any 10-game stretch is a great problem to have. But I do at least want to stay observant, keep our eyes open on like what can change. But unless some new stuff happens with the buyout market, which, man, so many rumors, but huge buyout market. Oh, everyone's going to get involved there. Not happening to the extent I thought. So it looks like the roster we've got is the roster we've got. And so now it's what are we going to do with this moving forward? So again, we've got the Hawks, the Bulls, the Thunder, the Rockets coming up this week. I think it's a 4-0 is absolutely what you would expect. 3-1 at the worst. I don't want to imagine going 2-2 on that slate of games. But looking forward, I still think we're in a good spot. Guys, anything to add as we kind of wrap this one up, or anything that maybe the listeners should be looking for over the next week?
The big thing is how Torrey Craig is going to get integrated into the lineup. And that'll be really interesting to see if he's a Jay Crowder 2.0 with the second group, or if he's going to start getting some run with that first group to see what kind of connection they have.
Well, and we know Monty likes him because word broke that they tried to pick him up last offseason and the cards just didn't shake out. So I'm hopeful for him and the addition he's been. And if he ends up being the piece that helps this gel even more together, then James Jones should get executive of the year just for that one signing. So.
Yeah, and one more fun stat. This comes from Mike V. Hill, one of the guys over the timeline. He actually tweeted this right before we started recording. But in the last 6 games, there have been about 49 minutes where Booker and Paul are not on the floor. The highest score in those games is Torrey Craig, who's only played in 5 of those 6 games with 27 points. Next closest is Langston and Campaign at 18 each. So, look, even if he can be a spark plug in those minutes where usually we suffer, good on him. I think it's a great signing. To your point, Philip, excited to see how he's used. But until then, thank you guys for listening. Again, like, subscribe, do all that good stuff. We appreciate you being here. Be on the lookout for another episode next Tuesday. But for Philip and Ryan, I'm Ethan, and this has been Into the Valley.
We out.